The Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper. And now, Coach Bill Clark.
Welcome in. It's episode 2 of the Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper. Along with Coach Bill Clark, I'm Pat Smith and Landrum Roberts from JOX 94.5's three-man front. Coach, week 0, what a weekend.
Yeah, well, great start. Obviously, we kicked off with Georgia Tech and FSU, came down to the wire, which is, it's what you want in a game. Classic, and as Georgia Tech Coach Key talked about after the game, they ran the ball and ran it well. Big win for Georgia Tech, but a lot of great games. I was watching UNA whenever that thing ended up that night. Of course, they had a tough loss, but a lot of great games and got to start on the right foot.
Not only the action, Coach, that we had from week 0, we also had a documentary that hit on Netflix. Connor Stallions, infamous with the Michigan football program, the sign-stealing scandal. I want to ask you from your perspective, I had no idea, and Pat and I talked about it on Three Man Front, that there was some kind of like dark web or underground cult that was going on with these people that share these signs. And according to the documentary, they would all get together on Sundays and share information. Give us your experience. How real is this? How much does it affect college football?
Yeah, it's very real. And, of course, we could go back to the time we found out, New England was filming sidelines. I mean, this has been going on forever, but as the advent of tempo, a lot of offensive coaches were looking at defensive coaches, but the defense coach could wait. He could wait on that offensive coach. Tempo changed that, the volume of signals now so they could play faster. Now, what happened on that, guys started saying, well, wait a second, all's fair now. And nobody had a problem with whatever you could see on a TV copy and it was on the sideline. This is a different story, though. When you start talking about the staffs that had those extra guys that did nothing but look for this, did they start showing up at games, as I know had happened to us? They're showing up at your games. They're filming your games on their phone or whatever. I had the team show up at my hotel as we were doing walkthrough.
Wait a second. You had a team show up to your walkthrough at the hotel.
Yes, I found it out later. When you can't get back to the line of scrimmage, it's like, what's going on here? So they had your signals and they were at your hotel.
Oh, wow.
But I think when you start having guys that are hiding out on sidelines, we're taking it to another step.
All right. So if you're in a game, how many games in your career do you believe that perhaps, something funny's going on? Now, you just mentioned, obviously, one particular game, but was that prevalent? Did you go through a couple of games per year where you were just sitting there going, wait a second, the way that they knew our offense was lined up, the way that things were going defensively, did you kind of smell a rat in regards to some of these games that you played?
Yeah, and you knew those guys that was really what they were known for. All of us, though, knew, hey, if I'm giving things away on my sideline during a game, this thing
kind of like in a baseball game when a pitcher is tipping his pitches.
100%.
That's fair. But what the Astros were doing, beating on the trash can, that's a different story.
That's a different story, and I think that's where we all, as coaches, felt like there's a line. We have no problem with things where we need to do a better job. If we're going to signal, we can't give things away, an obvious run or pass or things like that. It's when you've done everything, you've tried to make a big deal about it, and they still found out or got you, something's up.
All right, I want to get your opinion just from your experience. But if a certain school, there's video of Connor Stallions, it appears to be Connor Stallions, on the sideline at Central Michigan. It has taken them over 10.5 months. They're still digging into it. They're still investigating, Coach. I told Pat, someone who's on a sideline every single Saturday, you notice if there's anybody new down there. Everybody is documented. You know who is on that sideline. First of all, is that realistic, that they can't figure out if he was there or not?
I don't know how you couldn't. I really don't, especially with video and all the above. But I guess it's possible.
All right, so we talk about penalties. We know that the NCAA doesn't have quite the bite that they used to back in the day. So if you were on the infractions committee, I asked everybody on Three Man Front this question earlier this week. If you were on the infractions committee and you have the information in front of you about this Connor Stallions case, you watch the documentary, you see the evidence building there, what should, if anything, happen to the Michigan football program based on the fact that it appears that they cheated and they went through this whole scandal, this whole scheme to get the signals from another team?
Yeah, and I will say this: there are so many people that have done various parts of this, as you talked about the dark web,
but not to this extent.
Not to this extent. And I think if you can verify, that's what I say. If you can verify that he was there, which sounds like I've not watched the documentary, then I think the penalties have to be harsh.
I feel like this is a deposition, but I have to ask you one more question. Right. Any way that a head coach has no idea that his assistants have something in place where they have either hired out a guy that's going to come in and help with the sign stealing, or that any of this is going on where they can plead plausible deniability?
No. I mean, I don't see how. Not if you're involved in your team at all. I don't know how you would. Once again, things have been going on. You know, the Sundays, as we talked about, everybody, hey, we pick these things up. These guys talk behind the scenes. Once again, we've got to do a better job. We've got to protect. And I always looked at that when I went and did a walkthrough at a place. Were we covered? Were we protected? Hey, I remember we played Marshall. No offense to Marshall, but we're in this dining room and there's 2 cameras in there. Immediately there goes something on these cameras. Not saying they were doing anything. We just know
you had to be cognizant of
had
what.
to be cognizant.
Yeah.
And so I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about things that we've seen through the years, which were, hey, we were looking to see if we saw something on the TV copy. We were expecting those things. It's the above and beyond that kind of gets way past the spirit. Thankful for the helmet communications now to eliminate this mess.
Okay, so finally, and I'm like, Landry, I'm sorry. Don't mean to seem like this is a deposition, Coach, but this is fascinating. So in the coaching profession, would you say that it's a minority of coaches that have the reputation of perhaps trying to get your signals to the level of perhaps what Michigan did, or is it a majority of coaches? What kind of percentage would you put on that?
I'd say every one of them are trying to get your signals. I think it's the way they would go about it. The ones that I knew they had based their whole game plan on having your signals. Hey, we're very simplistic. We're going to have your signals. That's when I would have a problem. When, I understand a little bit. It's when you've based your whole offense or defense on stealing signals. Of course, I guess there's always the thought you're not going to get them. But it's very prevalent. That's why I'm so excited about the communication, because I think we're just going to eliminate a lot of mess that we've all been dealing with.
My final question from the sign stealing, what's the most creative thing that you've ever heard that has been employed to steal some of those signals? Because I've heard some crazy stories.
Oh, I think just the big thing of going to your games, and that's why you try to change week to week. But you think of the in-depth offense and defense of how many signals you've got. And we always talked about having multiple signals changing weeks. In the old days, you remember we wore the wristbands.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you just change them.
Right.
And of course, I've seen guys trying to steal wristbands. I've seen, there's probably not much we haven't seen. This was a new one, though, dressing a guy up on the sideline. Obviously, it's probably happened before, but maybe it's the first we've heard of it.
Okay. You don't have to name the school. I'm not asking you to.
I wish you would.
But I'm thinking back at a story because being a UAB graduate, I used to play flag football intramural on the Ullman field, where you guys practiced many, many moons. And there used to be a grocery store across the street from the Ullman building. And I know that the fence was covered up for you guys, but I heard rumors throughout college football that there were times that there were opposing schools or maybe friends of opposing schools that they would just come kind of hang out in the parking lot at the grocery store and kind of try to see what they could see, what they could maybe video a UAB football practice.
Well, I could tell you so many UAB stories. First thing I said, we're putting a tarp up, a double tarp on our fence. Why? I said, the fact that you're asking me why tells me why you guys have lost a lot of games. We're going to double tarp this. I will get it sponsored. I'll pay for it if I have to.
Sure.
I had folks come up to me and say, the last scrimmage of the team before was sent to the opening opponent. I'm sure they didn't turn that down. I don't know that as a fact, but pretty much know it's a fact. So these are things that you hear. And one of my big things was let's stay away from these problems. Let's be very cognizant. They're trying to get our stuff. There's some guys that lived that, and I'd hear stories of every time this team went on the road, they'd have a guy always come early, and guys that of are good coaches. It's just like, what will they not do when winning is so important to them, their school, their finances? A lot went on.
Well, ultimately, it goes back to, and I'm sure that you preach this. Let's control what we can control. And those are things that you can control.
That's right, and I think I was so mad the few times I know we were gotten. I didn't feel like I did a good enough job. It's when they show up at your hotel or they film you the week before. That's when you get upset.
All right, it's time for Smart Bank's Smart Call of the Week, Coach, and let's talk about Georgia Tech and some of those adjustments they made, especially there in the second half against Florida State.
Yeah, I think quickly they determined they could tighten up. You didn't see the deep shots, which was some of the questions I would have about Florida State. I mean, it was a lot of quick game, hide route screens. They got the ball out quick, but they didn't take the deep shots. Maybe they took a few, but weren't effective. So I think you saw Georgia Tech tightening up more and more as the game went on. Second thing I thought, and I know Coach Key talked about it after the game, was the run game, as we referenced earlier. Their run game, every way you can run a counter. And there's counters where there's one guy. When you start seeing what we call super counters, where it's a guard, a tight end, and maybe a running back, you're getting all these three guys off a fake, and you got the quarterback running the ball, who I say makes a 12th guy if you can run the quarterback, and they did that as well.
Not that there's not room for improvement for Mike Norvell and Florida State, but your week 0 breakdown, what is going to be a potential problem for the Seminoles that might keep reoccurring throughout the season?
I think that's going to be the question. Just what are they going to do with the quarterback? Can they open it up downfield? I think they were very solid. I think the problem for all of us as a coach, as fans, who's this team I'm playing? How good are they? The only thing that will tell you that is time. How good is this Georgia Tech team, who was obviously very well prepared? For me now, this is not earth-shattering because it was such a close game. It really could have went either way. But I do think they're going to have to develop more offense. And they weren't just dominant where they were, I thought, defensively last year. So they're just going to get better all around. Not bad. We'll know more about Georgia Tech as we go.
I think the thing that surprised us all in that game, Coach, and you can kind of address it, is the fact that Florida State, especially the first couple of drives, they established the running game. They had, 50 yards rushing, Landrum?
58 in the first drive.
58 in the first drive. And then after that, 40 yards?
40 yards.
Yeah, under 100 yards total running the football.
Well, what happens, and this is what happens when I play somebody honest, which means as you spread guys out and I cover down on them. Let's just use that pretty simple. Let's say there's 4 receivers. As you see the box widen, we cover down. Why do you cover down on these receivers? Because of quick throws. Okay, if I can come down and take a guy and tighten him down and take one of these secondary guys, maybe play man, which is what starts happening, I get another guy in the box and I take away quick throws. Where have I got to go now? I've got to go down the field. And you didn't see that, so what had happened? Tighten the box, tighten down in man coverage, and the defense got better for Georgia Tech. And that stuff, they started cutting down on the run game and the quick throws.
Yeah, and something you brought up with Georgia Tech offensively and the counter, it seemed like we saw 20 different formations, but maybe the same 2 or 3 handful of plays.
Correct.
And what that can do from your experience as not only a head coach but a defensive coordinator in keeping the other side off balance.
So just real quick, this cross motion we're seeing so much where they fake the speed sweep. What are you trying to do? You're messing with eyes.
Right.
So I've got this going this way. I've got a running back going this way, and then I've got a counter, maybe with a quarterback. You got eyes going everywhere. Here's the other thing now defensively. We usually get better as the year goes because now I have tape. Week 0 and week 1 is a defense coordinator's nightmare.
And you just mentioned that with the eyes because that's a term that now when we got into the advent of the hurry-up offenses and so many people were doing it, I kept hearing defensive coaches saying eye discipline, eye discipline, eye discipline. But it's that split second, and that's what they're counting on, and sometimes that can mean the difference in making a tackle or giving up a score.
Yeah, and you start looking at what we call a hide route. Look for these hide routes where the tight ends are behind the line of scrimmage. We were doing that a lot in 2018, but all that goes in there. He's coming behind to kick out. He's kicking out, now he's in the flat. All those things, those quick throws, those easy throws that fit off the run game, and they're really an RPO. So he's sitting there reading, and you can read that whole thing.
Did you see anything that would give you the indication that Georgia Tech that was a fluke? Or do you believe that this team has turned the corner and Brent Key is installing the type of hard-nosed football that he needs to have to get that program to where he wants it?
Solid. I just think very solid. I think once again, how good's Florida State? How good are they? I don't usually anoint people unless they're just dominant. I didn't see dominant, but I saw good. That's my kind of team, that runs the ball. But, if you add in those deep shots, which is what happens, the better they run the ball, the tighter people get to the line of scrimmage. Now we got to be able to make those throws. If you can make those throws, you got a really good offense.
How tough is it going to be for Brent Key to bring that team back down to earth? You were a double-digit underdog. You go over to Dublin, you do what a lot of people didn't think you could do. But meanwhile, you're coming back home. You're going to take a Georgia State team that you're favored by 20-plus over. How do you get them focused and ready to play that football game?
That's where coaching comes in. It's 24 hours. Win, lose, or draw, and of course, I love the teaching from a win. we learned a lot in losses because they were so hard and they were so tough. And we didn't want to experience them again. So we always said, hey, let's just keep winning. We'll teach. But I was super hard on them after wins because they're feeling good. Hey, let's keep our heads straight. And then you start showing, let me show you who Georgia State has beaten. They upset here, and we remember those games. But, you start naming them, you show video, you're talking about it over and over and over. Keep our heads screwed on. That was a big deal, but it's behind us. Let's enjoy it, but we've moved forward.
Web Concrete each week brings us the Building Blocks to Victory coach. Matchup this week features number 1 Georgia taking on number 14 Clemson.
Yeah, so some behind-the-scenes knowledge we'll give folks, and as my folks that I get to talk to and you get to hear, obviously we're not going to tell the opening plays or anything like that, but I'm going to kind of go from a Clemson standpoint because I think we know Georgia's the favorite. I looked at a stat the other day, it was a tweet about, I think they had 44 players on NFL rosters now from the 21 team. So we know they're good. They've been doing a great job recruiting. Kirby's done an unbelievable job, but let's talk about things to give Clemson a chance. I think maybe these things are obvious, but let's just think points of emphasis on starting fast. As good as Georgia is, you could get behind in a hole and possibly get blown out if they don't start fast. So what are those things they're going to do? And, we talked off air about what do you do when somebody plays a lot of man coverage. I was a man coverage guy. We didn't play it all the time. Georgia doesn't play it all the time. But what are those things you can do with motions, pick routes, and changing the look of the offense right before, in pre-snap? Because, if you get those guys and let them get a really good picture of what's going on, they're going to be really good. So changing that picture, motions, things to defeat man coverage. Obviously the quarterback from Clemson, Klubnik, has got to have a great game and a fast start. Do they let him use his legs? I think that's a question. I think he's a really good runner. Some people use that running ability to kind of keep themselves alive. But starting fast, using these motions, hurting the man coverage to get their offense off track early on.
If you're Clemson defensively and you're trying to plan for what Carson Beck, Mike Bobo, their offensive coordinator, want to do, you already got an advantage knowing that Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey from last season's team, they're playing in the NFL.
Yep.
They still got talent on that roster. There's questions whether ETN will be suspended for this game or if it will come later in the week. I'm sure that they're planning on him playing. But what are the things that you need to take away immediately for Georgia offensively?
Yeah, I just think, obviously, Bowers, unbelievable. I don't know if people really understand how good McConkey was, just how fast this guy was and the shots. Because what they want to do, they want to run the ball and take those play-action shots. And they've got a guy who also doesn't put them in bad situations. He's a very, he manages the game and also protects the ball, which I think, that's the thing I always want to go. Turnover is the number 1 stat in the game that we're looking at. We looked at all the stats. Turnover margin is the number 1 stat, and he manages the ball, controls it very well. But running the ball and deep play action shots, that's what you got to limit. If we're going to get up there and stop their running game, we still got to protect deep.
All right, Alabama Power 5 of the week, Coach. I know week 0, we didn't have a lot of teams in your top 5 or the top 15 that we talked about last week, but there was one top 10 team that did lose, and that's Florida State. So give us your power poll this week.
Yeah, I think we're still sitting right where we were, obviously, with Georgia. We're going to know a lot. We're going to know a lot about everybody as we go. Ohio State, Oregon, we've kept Alabama in there. So I think those guys, Texas, I think till we see more, that's where we are. We've moved Florida State out. Now, who moves in? Because we've kind of got that next 12 as we look to the 12-team playoffs. I'd be interested in what you guys think. Who's that next team? We kind of mentioned all these others. This is going to be a big week to see all of them.
Well, I think you have to look, and I don't know how much you can take into account. Ole Miss, we know that what they have coming back, the guys that Lane has been able to add through the portal, is very comfortable with Jackson Dart and his quarterback play, the skill position. They seem good, and they seem like they're better, maybe personnel-wise on the defensive side than they've ever been. But again, how much do you learn? No offense, but you're playing Furman.
Right.
And your opening week. But I think Ole Miss is one of those teams that people are naturally going to gravitate to because they should be undefeated in the first part of their schedule.
Well, you sit here with Texas with the questions at running back. Ole Miss, if these defensive changes, I saw he picked his brother up, which was probably a huge addition. You got a great coach who now and he knows you. That was a big pickup, I think. Just another really good coach added to a good staff with those defensive players. So I think Ole Miss is right there teetering on the top 5 as well.
Coach, before we get to Donahue's Chevrolet Drive for Success this week, we have a lot of really fine people a part of this program, and I know you're very proud to talk about them.
Yeah, I am just so proud of our sponsors. These are all people I had relationships with in the past. First, let's talk about Smart Bank. I'm on the advisory board for those guys, and we mentioned last week, these guys are kind of new to Alabama, but they're people you know. A lot of these guys were at Compass Bank. Hometown banking, and that's what I've seen from them. It's relationship banking, and that's what we all want. Webb Concrete, let's talk about them. I broke my glasses out because I want to make sure we tell you all about Webb Concrete. Just one is their locations. They have an Oxford showroom, Oxford Ready Mix, Heflin, Roanoke Ready Mix, Center, Pell City, Lumber, Concrete, Flooring, Birmingham, Homewood. So they really do it all. Obviously, those guys have been around for a long time. Anytime you look out, you're going to see a Webb Concrete truck, but they do more than that, and we talked about that.
Alabama Power. Obviously, when you say Alabama Power, you talk about college football.
You do, and I think just once again, I keep coming back to the philanthropy of what Alabama Power does for our community and how many events, and we were naming them last week. The different events, the different projects where they give back and get involved with local schools, and just a lot of good things. So appreciative to Alabama Power.
Okay, so Donahue's Chevrolet's Drive for Success. So let's talk about Donahue for a second because they sponsor this segment of the show, the Drive for Success, each week.
Well, they never have a dock fee. You go to DonahueChevrolet.com to find your vehicle. But once again, I had a personal relationship, bought 2 vehicles from Donahue. Great guys, and guys that, once again, small town guys, people that you can trust.
All right, so let's talk about the season openers for Alabama and Auburn, Coach. Both heavily favored games for both Alabama and Auburn. Just some of the things that you, as a coach, will be looking at for those 2 games.
Well, I think if you got to hear Coach DeBoer's press conference, I really enjoyed it. Just he's got a calmness to him, and I think that comes from coaching a lot of different games. And I don't know if that gets talked about enough. I say this a lot when you've won at a bunch of different spots. You know what that looks like now. It's not Alabama. Now, granted, he's been given keys to this Porsche or Cadillac or whatever you want to call it, so he probably walked in there and goes, wow, this is unreal. The pressure that goes with that, he's going to get to see that soon. There's just no way to replicate what that's like, what it's like playing an SEC road game. But I think the things he talked about were very good. One, talking about Western Kentucky, Coach Helton and those guys I know well. If you go back and look at the stats the last few years, they've had some really, really good offenses. And that's going to be a question, as you go in. Who are we defensively? I think when we go back week 0, week 1 for everybody, Alabama, Auburn, UAB included, what does that opponent look like with new rosters, with transfer portal? Who is this guy? Who are these personnels that come in when you're a defensive coach and you don't even know some of these guys that are in 2 tight ends, they're in 4 receivers. Who are the guys? Do they match up with who we think they are? And he alluded to some of those things. So I think we know they've got a chance to have a great team. We've got them, top 5 right now. But it's going to be interesting against what I think it's going to be a well-coached Western Kentucky team. We'll see how long they can stay with them.
What about Auburn?
Yeah, I think same thing with Auburn. We got to hear Coach Freeze. They had the multiple guys on the depth chart where we were trying to find out, that's a lot of oars. They have went out and gotten a lot of good portal guys. We've talked about the quarterback. I think he's had a great offseason. What I've heard from people that were at scrimmages. So I think what we're all looking forward to with both groups, Alabama and Auburn, is letting them play. Let's watch them play and let's see what it looks like. I'm excited to see this receiving core for Auburn. Also, how involved is Coach Freeze getting in the play calling? He's an offensive coach, got a great mind. I think I saw him at the end of the year start getting more involved. So that's going to be a question. But I think it's going to be quarterback, this new receiver group. And we always got to look at the other side of the ball and where are they defensively. I don't know how much we'll see in this first game, how much we'll know, but we'll at least get to see them play.
All right, so help us out. These 3 games that you mentioned, we got one on Thursday with UAB. Also, you have Auburn and Alabama. There's the potential for 3 blowouts. What are we looking for? In any event that there's a blowout in any of these games, what are fans looking for in their teams?
Well, let's talk about UAB. Once again, they're playing, our show. You may be listening to our show after the game, but this is a game you're expected to win. You're wanting to see your guys handle all situations. The new headphones, which we'll talk about later, the new call systems, the 18 iPads on the sideline. How do you handle getting special teams guys on the field and off the field? How do you handle the heat? All these things are going to add up. I think UAB, obviously, we feel like they've got all these offensive weapons coming back. Well, who are they defensively? We know that was something they struggled with last year. So is that something we'll know this week? They're going to have a big game the next week with Monroe. We'll discuss that next week. You got Coach Vincent who's there. So are they looking ahead to that? Are they looking ahead to Arkansas in 3 weeks? A lot to look forward to check out.
Well, this program is brought to you by the fine people at Buffalo Rock, Dr. Pepper, the presenting sponsor of this show, and Jimmy Lee and the rest of those folks. They just do so much for college football.
Yeah, I want to say something about Jimmy Lee. Man, what a great guy for our community. Enough doesn't get said for him about him, his family, what they've done for UAB, and he's going to be honored with the Mike Sly Foundation.
Sure is.
And the great work they do. So that's coming up. Thank you to Dr. Pepper and obviously what they do for college football.
All right, you mentioned it earlier in the program, but the new technology we're getting this year, how it's going to affect, we have the in-helmet communication, but also the tablets on the sideline. I want to quote a coach today, and this was an active FBS coach, and what he said, and he'll remain nameless, but this is what he had to say. He said, "We love technology, and everyone's excited about iPads, but I was obviously the only coach in the country who voted against it. I don't want iPads. In the old days, you actually had to coach. You had to watch the action, figure out what was going on, and then go make adjustments." He goes on to continue to just really downplay. Well, he just hates technology, Coach. That's what we're seeing.
One of the first things you learn is whatever it is, and it's time now to go with it. But, I think high schools have been doing that. The pros have been doing it. Now, there will probably be an adjustment. Is 18 too many? Should we be watching the live game as it goes? Those are all the things I've been thinking on, as all right, what is that going to look like? They're going to have exactly what you've done in Series 1. We got to change Series 2. We got to change Series 3. I think it's going to create so much more gamesmanship. They're actually looking at what we ran. Does that set something up later? Now they're talking about what we ran Series 1. Now Series 2, we'd make a big change and hit them with it.
If there was anything when you were there on the sideline as a head coach that you hear, work smarter, not harder, that actually helped you save time where you could appropriate to doing other things, did you ever say, "Wow, man, I wish it was like the old days"? I mean, no. I'm sure people still like to churn butter in some parts of the country.
Well, and I think this is that in-game, the in-game situation of where the players are looking at, but it's going on in high school, it's going on in the pros, college are just now getting to it.
In regards to some of this in-helmet technology, how much do you think from a defensive standpoint, let's say before you make a call defensively, that you're going to have to wait to the very last minute because if the offense and the quarterback still got his hands over his ear holes, he's trying to listen to the calls from the sideline. As a defensive coordinator, what are you're waiting for them to come out of their formation so you can make a final call, right? I mean, how much is that going to play into this, waiting to the last second to make a call?
Yeah, there's going to be so much. I think there's also going to be a little bit of time between series where we could get a word, hey, it's second and blank, it's third and short. What do we want to be thinking? It's going to be interesting to me because we had really trained our defensive guys to look, everybody's getting the call.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, this one guy's getting the call. What does that change? Is he really giving us situations, scenarios? I love the idea of the things you can put in the quarterback's head. Who's doing that? Is that the coordinator? What's the head coach doing throughout all that? So there's going to be a lot of great things that we find, especially in this week 1.
How much of the impact of the new rule with the 2-minute warning in the second and fourth quarters do you think that ultimately impacts the game?
I think it really does. I think what it does is just like the pros, it sets up all this gamesmanship around using that 2-minute warning. You don't feel like you can't use a timeout earlier, but now you've really got 4 timeouts. I think it's going to set up a lot more end-of-game scenarios just with that extra timeout.
Last question in regards to any kind of rule changes. I've never heard them talk about it before, but I actually heard somebody this week mention, why are the hash marks in the NFL not the same distance as the hash marks in regards to the width in college football? Anybody ever explain that to you?
Yeah, every bit of it is all about offense. The less you have a hash mark, and we always said, 75% of the game is played on a hash mark. Once I've got a tighter boundary and a wider field, there's things that helps defensively. When you get them they're basically playing in the middle of the field all the time, so I can't dictate how I'm going to put an extra guy to the field and all those things. Now you're basically in the middle of the field all the time.
Oh, wow. It's a great conversation, and I hope that you have bookmarked this podcast because we will be here each and every week on the radio. You can hear this program on Friday night this week because the UAB football game against Alcorn State. But then we'll be back to the regular schedule next week, Coach, in which the podcast will be up and running. And then, of course, we'll be on the air next Thursday night right before the NFL game.
Yeah, and we picked up a new sponsor, Radiance Technology. We'll talk more about them next week. But, we want to continue to make this show something people want to hear. We're going to try and give you behind the scenes. We're going to have some coaches on the show soon. So all these things, we're going to keep trying to get better every week.
Thanks for tuning in. This has been the Coach Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper.
This has been the Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper.